Philadelphia's parking lot density over a small
You just
area.
got ADHD?
The pink patches
Fuck.
represent parking lots, and as you can see, they're all quite large and quite close to each other. Now, Philadelphia has a population of 1.6 million people, but they have 2.2 million parking spaces. So Philadelphia has more car slots than it does human beings, which should sound absolutely ridiculous to anyone. But if you've never experienced anything else, you might not understand the depth of this problem. So let's compare Philadelphia to a European city, Amsterdam for example. A city that's roughly the same size in population, but with a completely different view on urban planning. Now sure, they do have parking lots, but instead of having an excess of one per person, they instead have one for every 3 people. Although that's not the entire story, because 40% of these parking spaces are actually underground, making room above ground for what is significantly more important: sidewalks and bike lanes. And to understand why they are so important, you only need to use some common sense. See, if you have a car-based city, or country for that matter, with no bike lanes or sidewalks, you are actively excluding those who can't afford to pay thousands of dollars a year on a car from society.
Facts.
Since they can't go to and from work or even to the grocery store in a safe, efficient way. And if you add to that terrible public transportation, it will lead to charts like this, where you can clearly see the most popular mode of transport in America that just so happens to be the car, which isn't too surprising, since America is designed for cars, not humans. And while there are some sidewalks and bike lanes in the United States' largest cities, they are either unprotected and really scary to use, or just end abruptly, with no other option but to use the street itself to walk or bike on. Which is really not ideal if you want to send your kids to school on their own, or to get some milk in the store. I mean, I biked everywhere when I was a kid, and it seems like if you're under 16 in the US, and therefore don't have your driver's license yet, you're practically under house arrest until your parents come home. Which doesn't sound that fun to me. And I remember clearly when I visited the United States with my parents a few years back that whenever we tried to walk anywhere, it felt like we were intruding on the car's territory, since we literally had to walk through various parking lots and streets with no sidewalks in sight to get to our destination just a few hundred meters away. And it doesn't have to be this way. See, the streets of Amsterdam, for example, are filled with pedestrians because they have sidewalks that aren't at all scary to use, because you feel separated from the road, and that's because you are separated from the road. The most beautiful thing about Amsterdam, though, is that it's incredibly bike-friendly, as it's filled with designated bike lanes that don't end abruptly, and are instead carefully laid out all over the city to make it easy for people to commute anywhere. Amsterdam even has no cars.
Imagine a nigga just crashed. Oh, these motherfuckers gonna hit the deck.
And even underground bike parking spaces that look
like
pretty
me,
insane.
cutting up on a bike.
Something you'd never find in the US. But if you think it's unfair to compare the United States to literally the best city for bikes in the world, then just remember it's practically the same story in all of Europe's largest cities like Copenhagen or Paris. Now sure, they aren't at the same level as Amsterdam, but whenever I bike around Copenhagen, I don't feel like a car is going to hit me, because we have our own designated lanes that are sometimes as wide as the road itself. And you might think, well, the United States will never be able to get to that level, so why even compare them? But the thing is, and this might surprise you, not too long ago, the United States' largest cities were actually designed exactly like these European cities. Take for example Houston, that currently looks like this, with tons of space allocated to these massive parking lots. Seems like it's always been this way, but that's not the case, because in 1920, Houston looked like this, with a lot more space for pedestrians. They could actually walk around the city without fearing for their lives, or feeling like they were intruding on the car's territory. This means the United States didn't design the cities to be this way, they bulldozed them to be. And while European metropolitan areas are increasingly rolling back on the car's dominance with high-speed trains, metros, and non-automotive methods of transit, the United States is increasing their dependence on cars by expanding highways and demolishing houses, apartment complexes, businesses, and schools to fit them. Which doesn't really make any sense. I mean, if a city is expanding their number of highway lanes from 16 to 20, there's a problem. So I've been trying to figure out why they've done this to themselves and what actually happened. And what I found was surprising to say the least. Here, Take a look at this. In cities like Charlotte or Portland, Oregon, there's parking lot minimums that are placed in high schools, which is actually a practice adopted by many states and cities. And this means that a high school containing hallways, a cafeteria, an auditorium, offices, restrooms, gyms, and everything in between can be around 5,100 square feet in size, just for the buildings alone. But because of these parking lot minimums, a school of this size must also have a parking lot that's half the size of the entire school. That means 2,005 square feet of space has to be allocated to parking lots and driving aisles alone, which is absolutely insane, as this simply isn't an option in some areas. But since it's preset in many school budgets, it just leads to cramped learning spaces and an emphasis on buying cars to get to and from school. It's essentially a silent message sent to students, teachers, and parents. Buy cars or else. I mean, this would never work in Copenhagen. Not only don't we have space for that, but there's no need. We don't drive our kids to school here. We just give them their backpack and then they either walk or bike to school from the age of 6. Alone, I might add. That's normal here.
You can't do that in
But going back to
you can't do that in America because the crime rate. Motherfuckers is sick. You gotta remember, they kidnapping niggas in America. You can't send kids to school, you feel me?
Parking lots. It's simply the result of city planners mandating nearly 3 to 8 parking spaces in city areas per car. A practice that started in the 1930s as cars became more affordable for the average American family. But cars were also decreasing.
America's lazy too, by the way.
In pricing.
America's very lazy. If there's a way to do this shit quicker, we're gonna do it, man. Niggas used to walk and shit. Niggas got cars. Oh, you could get a car? Yeah, I'm not gonna.
Europe at this time, yet they didn't bulldoze their cities to make room for them. So something strange is happening here, and experts are asking for an end to the massive parking lot requirements because of the valuable space they eat and the uglification of the urban landscape. And I tend to agree that this isn't particularly beautiful. So what about the solutions? What about instead of remodeling entire cities, the United States just implemented better public transport? I mean, in Copenhagen I live right next to both a train station, metro station and bus stop, and therefore I can literally go anywhere in Copenhagen without the need of a car or bike for that matter. So would that be a good idea? Well, currently only 5% of Americans use public transportation, and there's actually a very simple reason for that. It's terrible. This is a map of Chicago's train system. If you look at its design, it's not very hard to figure out what it was built to do. All its different lines intersect here, in Chicago's downtown, and then fan outward. This is a system that's really good at moving people between the suburbs or the outer rings of the city and then downtown, meaning there's a complete lack of routes going from suburb to suburb, making it useless to a lot of people who need those connections for public transport to make sense. Transit systems across the US were built to serve a very specific type of commute, from outside the center of the city to inside it. But studies show that today, the most common American commute is actually from suburb to suburb, routes that public transit in the US usually doesn't serve, and the train routes that do exist aren't exactly desirable. I think it's time to talk about Amtrak. Amtrak has become somewhat of a plague on the American railway system, with constant train derailment, increased taxpayer funding, expensive tickets, and lack of connectivity. This means most Americans aren't too keen on using trains to get around, even if they technically serve a route they could use. Stations are also far from each other, and major train-riding cities like Boston, Washington, and New Jersey haven't gotten an upgrade in years. The system pales in comparison to Switzerland's sophisticated railways. They're more than 400.
This nigga low-key talking shit. Like, I feel like he from Europe and he really dissing the fuck out the States. He like, yeah, it's pales in comparison to Switzerland.
50 million passengers use like each year, which by the way is around 13 times as many passengers as Amtrak has per year. And let's not forget, Switzerland only has 8.5 million inhabitants compared to the United States' 330 million, making these numbers absolutely insane. But even with Congress's recent plans to hand $30 billion over to Amtrak for a high-speed train, Amtrak has no plans to use that money for such a system. Instead, they're pouring all of that cash into restoring aging tracks from New York to New York City, repairing an already existing tunnel and expanding Penn Station. Basically meaning, they are going to invest their government funds in what is proven to be profitable and neglect everything else. So maybe the train idea was too far-fetched, but buses should work. The only problem is that someone needs to pay for them, and currently only a quarter of public transit is paid for by ticket sales, meaning 75% is subsidized by the local, state and federal government, which is truly not ideal. But it simply doesn't make sense to just spend that money on expanding highways instead, as that will only worsen the problem. A fix needs to happen, and the best place to start might be the parking lots. We know the United States has way too many parking lots, so demolishing the unnecessary ones and condensing the cities would allow for more residential and commercial areas to be within walking distance of one another. It would also allow for green spaces that can be used as recreational spots, further improving the quality of life in each city. But obviously that would require the US to remove mandatory...
You know how much pussy niggas could have got if there was public transportation? You know how hard it is? Think about it like this. The United States is stopping you from getting bitches. If there's public transportation, along with social media, you could bag hoes 2 cities over. Or, you feel me? And be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna just catch the bus. Catch this bus, boom, you at her house, catch that bus, you home. Type shit. The reason why... The reason why you don't get any hoes is because your choice pool is so small, because your area where you can travel is so little. You know why I get more hoes than you? Because the whole world is my choice pool. I could see a girl in Cali, spit some game at her, you feel me? And then be like, alright, I'll be out there eventually. And when we link, we can link. You feel me? But you only have so many choices because you're stuck in your pond. I'm a shark in the ocean. You a guppy in a pond. You eating the little, you know what I mean? E. coli, whatever, in the water. I'm out here hunting. I'm gonna kill a whale. You a fucking goldfish. It's crazy.
Parking minimums from state laws, and that would be pretty difficult. But the benefits would be huge, as it would lead to the reduction of housing costs, something that's also a pressing problem in the United States these days. And sure, major cities like Seattle, Austin and Detroit will never be as condensed as Copenhagen or Zurich, but the vast spaces can be used in a sort of hybrid manner.
Nigga called me a crawfish. I hate you niggas. Nigga said you're a crawfish.
Of interstate connectivity and pedestrian alternatives.
Insane.
The US could also take a page out of Paris's book, as they've been doing radical infrastructure changes over the past 3 decades to accommodate other modes of transport. Paris even has car-free days, where residents are encouraged to explore their city through alternative means. And they have committed to reducing the number of on-street parking spaces by 72% before 2024. But realistically, would the United States ever be able to implement anything like this? And will they ever be able to solve their infrastructure
problems? Ain't that
a
shrimp?
A solution is needed, but what do you think?
Shrimp really are the cockroaches of the sea. You know that, right? We're essentially eating sea roaches. You know that, right? You know what shrimp is, right? You know they eat anything. Leftovers, all that shit. Niggas, yeah, but they good? So are you saying roaches are good? I mean, seasoned correctly, would you eat a roach? Think about it.
That will end up being.
Nigga said he eats roaches, so what?